Intermission feature this afternoon, Opera News on the Air. Father Owen Lee, Professor of Classics at St. Michael's College, University of Toronto, will conclude his discussion of Wagner's Die Meistersinger, which he began last week, and will illustrate his remarks with musical excerpts on the Baldwin. Father Lee.
Thank you, Peter Allen. When I was a boy and went to the movies, there'd often be a big storybook up there on the screen, and some unseen hand would pull it open, and the pages would start turning by themselves, and then I'd be swept into the story. Well, that's what today's opera is for me. It's a big illuminated manuscript, a massive medieval songbook, with secular and sacred melodies jostling each other page on page for hundreds and hundreds of pages. Some unseen hand pulls it open at the first chord of the overture, and then the pages turn of themselves, and the melodies pour out in wondrous profusion, and the irresistible onward movement through those pages keeps me breathless till the last page echoes the first. I use a metaphor to describe Die Meistersinger because Die Meistersinger itself is full of metaphors. Just about everything in it, large and small, is or means something else. And one of the pleasures of hearing it again and again is the thrill of discovering what else and what else and what else it all means. The moment the curtain rises on the last chord of the overture, the metaphors begin to work. The people of Nuremberg are in church, just finishing a vesper hymn to John the Baptist. Once our Savior came to thee, by thy hand baptized to be. They sing in the style of a Lutheran chorale, but did you notice? Their sacred song is a musical variant of the secular theme of the Master Singers. This is the Master Singer tune that opens the opera. Take 2 quarter notes out of that, make appropriate changes in timing and harmony, and you get the Vesper hymn. So, right from the start, it's fairly clear that in this opera, the sacred will be a metaphor for the secular. The entire action takes place on the eve and feast of a saint, the saint to whom the Savior himself came for baptism. But why that day? Well, first, St. John's Day, Johannistag, June 24th, is a Christian feast superimposed on the old pagan observance of the summer solstice. On the eve of that midsummer day, evil spirits were thought to fare abroad and make men mad. Then St. John would send good spirits in the morning. It's the perfect day for Wagner's story, for both Acts 1 and 2 of Die Meistersinger, on the night before, end with bursts of midsummer madness, or, as Hans Sachs calls it, Wahn. Evil spirits are at work, like glowworms in the dark. And then, on the morning after, in Act 3, a song comes out of a midsummer night's dream that banishes the evil spirits, the Poltergeister, and in Hans Sachs's words, conjures up good spirits, Gute Geister. And there's another reason for using John the Baptist's day. That day gave us the very fundament of our music. The notes of our scale, ut, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, ut, weren't, after all, named by Julie Andrews or Mary Martin. They are the opening syllables of each successive line of the old Latin hymn sung for centuries on John the Baptist's eve. And when Wagner starts his story, he has his townsfolk sing a German version of that hymn to the Baptist that first gave us the notes of our scale. He wants us to know that in Die Meistersinger, baptism will be a metaphor for music, and he fills his John the Baptist opera with scales. From the opening motif to this statement of the rules for songwriting. Now, more about metaphor. If you radio listeners are following along with librettos, you must have noticed in Act 1 all those references to songbirds. Walter is told he must learn such master singer tones as the goldfinch, the lark, and the pelican, but he has his own kind of song. He learned it from an age-old Walter, the famous Walter van der Vogelweide, that is to say, Walter of the bird meadow. He's also learned his song from the meadow birds themselves. So he's impatient with the masters, though they bear such names as Nachtigall, nightingale, and Vogelgesang, bird song, and even the one who's sick and can't be there is named Niklaus Vogel, Nicholas the bird. Walter likens himself to a bird that soars above such owls, rooks, magpies, and crows. No wonder the masters reject him. They know something about metaphor too. And so the bird references continue to the last scene when all of Nuremberg rises to greet Hans Sachs with the chorale, Wach auf, awake, a nightingale is heralding a new dawn. The historical Sachs wrote those words in the 16th century. Here is Wagner's musical setting. Listen to how the soprano and bass lines move upwards and downwards along the scale. The historical Sachs had Martin Luther in mind when he wrote about that nightingale, but such is the cumulative richness of association in the opera that when we hear the words in Act 3, we think, yes, the nightingale in the words is Luther, but Wagner makes the music sound like Bach, and the scales remind me of John the Baptist. And the people clearly intend the nightingale to represent Hans Sachs. And Hans Sachs himself probably thinks by now that the nightingale is really Walter. And all of us who know the opera think at this point, oh, the nightingale is surely Wagner. Such are the uses of metaphor. Another pattern. All through the text there are references to shoes and boots, wax and pitch, leather and last. Young David clues us in to what all this means metaphorically when he says, shoemaking and song-making, I'm learning both together. In Die MEISTERSINGER, shoes are songs. In the acts to come, you'll see that metaphor working in these situations. Sachs hammers away at Beckmesser's shoes whenever he finds a fault in his song. Eva comes to Sachs insisting that her shoes pinch, but what she really wants is not a well-made shoe, but a well-made song for Walter to win the contest with. And while Sachs is busy working on the shoe, Walter appears in the doorway to sing the song. At the contest, Beckmesser, limping in his new shoes and unsure of his footing on the platform, attempts to fit the words of Walter's song to his own tune with laughable results. Neither the shoe nor the song fits. Now, have you noticed? Through his baptism and bird and shoe metaphors, Wagner is suggesting a whole aesthetic, a philosophy of art. Art has a kind of sacramental power. Art is also an extension of nature. And practically speaking, art is the right way of making something. Schopenhauer may have said the first, and Epicurus the second, and Aquinas the third, but none of them said it so imaginatively as Wagner. Are you ready now to go deeper? John the Baptist, who presides over this opera, is a figure for Hans Sachs. That will become clear in Act 3. When David sings, John the Baptist on the Jordan is Johannes, but here in Germany we call him Hans. Hans, why, master, and he turns to Sachs, today is your day too. After that, the identification of St. John and Cobbler John really takes hold. Sachs actually baptizes Walter's newborn song, and the redemptive power of the baptized song goes to work instantly. It changes the lives of all 5 characters who sing the famous quintet. And eventually, on the riverbank in the last scene, it affects all of Nuremberg. We're sure by then that St. John is a figure for Cobbler John. But you know, we might have spotted that the moment the curtain went up on Act 1, from that all-important Vesper hymn, where the people sing to John the Baptist, "Once our Savior came to thee, by thy hand baptized to be. Baptist, teacher, Christ's first preacher, take us by the hand there on Jordan's strand." On the surface, all this is conventional piety appropriate to Reformation Germany. But in the overall context of the opera, it works metaphorically too. It is a prayer that Walter may come to Sachs and be baptized, and that Sachs may teach his people and raise them up on a German strand to a true appreciation of a New Testament of song. That prayer at the beginning of the opera is answered, metaphorically, at the opera's end. If Sachs is John the Baptist, who, metaphorically, are the others? Their names will tell you. They are named for famous figures in the Bible who need redeeming, like King David and like Mary Magdalene. David and Magdalena yearn for redemption from a long apprenticeship so they can marry at last. And like Eve, Eva must be saved from Beckmesser, the devil of this piece, surely. His shoes are finished with pitch, not wax, and he himself exclaims, "Zum Teufel," the devil, at every turn. Wagner doesn't press all this as far as he might have. He doesn't name his young hero Jesus. After all, we're in a shoemaking context, and the Bible's John said of Jesus, "The strap of his sandal I am not worthy to loose." Instead, Wagner associates his hero with that forerunner of Jesus, Adam. That's quite clear in Act 2. Walter and Eva plan to elope, and Sachs tries to stop them with a song, and Beckmesser comes along too with a song. And what does Sachs sing? When Adam and Eve fled from paradise, lest they hurt their feet on the gravel outside, God told an angel to make them shoes before the devil turned cobbler. What does that song mean? Walter asks in the shadows. And Eva, who knows something about metaphor, says it's about us. It is, if you think of Walter as Adam, Eva as Eve, Beckmesser as the devil, and Sachs as the angel barring the way in and out of paradise, and if you're aware that in this opera shoes also mean songs. Above all, when we come to Act 3, listen to the words of the various drafts of our Adam's prize song. At first, the song is sacred in subject, drawn from the first pages of the Bible, a morning of wonderful light, a garden, a tree, a woman offering its fruit. Walter eventually says it right out. This is Eve in the Garden of Paradise, Eva im Paradies. Then the song becomes secular, about art, an evening where the urge to create is irresistible, a laurel tree, a woman peering through the branches. Walter eventually says, quite directly, this is the Muse of Parnassus, die Musa des Parnass. Religion and art, those co-metaphors in Die Meistersinger. Poor baffled Beckmesser, finding the first drafts, asks, is this a biblical song? And Sachs replies, you're missing a lot if you think just that. Right. Nothing in Die Meistersinger works on one level alone. When Walter conjures up more of his dream, his song turns New Testament. The words call to mind medieval representations of the Virgin Mary, with stars in her hair and suns in her eyes, born in grace, chosen as in a Magnificat. Why the Virgin Mary? Wagner was eventually to say that the real inspiration for Die Meistersinger was a painting of the Assumption, Mary taken up to heaven. In the Middle Ages, they loved to sing how the Ave in Ave Maria was the reverse of Eva. That is, how Mary, when she accepted the message of the angel, reversed the destructive process begun by Eve and began the whole process of redemption. They called Mary the new Eve. Through her came a redeeming from the flaw in human nature left by original sin. Ah, now we come to the heart of Die Meistersinger. Now we can see why baptism is so important a symbol in it. Baptism saves us from original sin, and the new song can save us from, well, what would it be in Wagner's scheme of things that in traditional Christianity is original sin? Hans Sachs has the word for it. Wahn, that destructive streak, that mad streak that runs through human nature like some tragic flaw. Sachs wonders about it over his books in Act 3. He almost despairs over it. He hears it sounding in himself like an echo out of his soul. Wahn, Wahn. And then, in a great moment, he rises from his books, walks to his window, and the realization comes to him as morning light breaks over his city that basic human instinct, Wahn, need not be destructive. The whole destructive process can be reversed. Wahn can be directed to creative ends, and that is what he proceeds to do. As Wagner composed his greatest works, he came again and again to the same profound realization. The flaw in our nature, the irrational, potentially destructive force within us, can also be powerfully creative, but it has to be directed. It has to be, in the context of today's opera, baptized. It has to be, to use Wagner's own term, it has to be redeemed. And the great value of art, which itself arises out of that basic human drive, is that it can meet that inner compulsion to destroy and release its potential to create. Do you remember what Wagner called the home he built for himself in Bayreuth? Wahn Fried, peace from Wahn, or better still, Wahn used for peace. Wagner's critics are quick to object. How could Wagner sing about personal redemption and self-understanding when in his life he never knew them? But that, it seems to me, is why he wrote opera after opera about them, out of the abundance of his intuitive genius and the abyss of his personal need. As Hans Sachs puts it, metaphorically of course, a songbird sings because he has to, and because he has to, he can. And so, at the end of Meistersinger, there comes a great cleansing baptism. The Wahn that infected all the characters on St. John's Eve is washed away on the riverbank on St. John's Day. We in the audience rise from the long opera cleansed, baptized, purified, and the songbook that is Die Meistersinger turns its last shining page.